Good morning, happy Wednesday, and thanks again for tuning in to Kivli Kids Cozy Corner. And I am Miss Kivli, as most of you probably know by now. We actually finished a chapter in this one today, so we get to start fresh on chapter 16, where Miss Honey and Matilda are going to Miss Honey's cottage. So hence the chapter title is Miss Honey's Cottage. It says, Miss Honey joined Matilda outside the school gates, and the two of them walked in silence through the village high street. They passed the greengrocer with his window full of apples and oranges, and the butcher with lumps of meat on display and chickens hanging up, and the small bank and the grocery store and the electrical shop. And then they came out the other side of the village to the narrow country road where there were no people anymore and very few motor cars. And now that they were alone, Matilda all of a sudden became wildly animated. It seemed as though a valve had burst in her and a great gush of energy was being released. She trotted beside Miss Honey with wild little hops, and her fingers flew as if she were to scatter them to the four winds, and her words went off like fireworks at terrific speed. It was Miss Honey this and Miss Honey that, and Miss Honey, I do honestly feel I could have almost moved anything in the world, not just tipping over glasses and little things like that. I feel like I could topple tables and chairs, Miss Honey, even when people are sitting in the chairs. I think I could even push them over in bigger things, much bigger things, like chairs and tables, and I only have to take a moment to get my eyes strong, and then I can push it out, and the strongness it is, and anything at all. As long as I am staring at it hard enough, I have to stare at it very hard, Miss Honey, very, very hard, and then I can feel it all happening behind my eyes, and my eyes get hot, just as though they were burning, but I don't mind in the least, Miss Honey. Whew, calm yourself down, child. Calm yourself down, Miss Honey said. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves and get too worked up so early in the proceedings. But you do think it's interesting, don't you, Miss Honey? Oh, it's interesting, all right, Miss Honey said. It is more than interesting, but we must tread very carefully from now on, Matilda. Why must we tread carefully? Matilda asked. Because we are playing with mysterious forces, my child, that we know nothing about. I do not think they are evil. They may be good. They may even be divine. But whether they are or not, let us handle them carefully. These were wise words from a wise old bird, but Matilda was too steamed to see it that way. I don't see why we have to be so careful, she said. She was still hopping about. I'm trying to explain to you, Miss Honey said patiently, that we are dealing with the unknown. It's an unexplainable thing. The right word for it is phenomenon. It is a phenomenon. Am I a phenomenon? Matilda asked. It is quite possible you are, Miss Honey said, but I'd rather you didn't think about yourself as anything in particular at the moment. What I thought we might do is explore this phenomenon a little further, just the two of us together, making sure we take things carefully at all times. You want me to do some more of it then, Miss Honey? That is what I'm tempted to suggest, Miss Honey said cautiously. Oh, goody good, said Matilda. I myself, Miss Honey said, am probably far more bowled over by it than you are, and I am trying to find some reasonable explanation. Such as what? Matilda asked. Oh, such as whether or not it's quite something to do with the fact that you are quite exceptionally precocious. What exactly does that word mean? Matilda said. A precocious child, Matilda, is one that shows amazing intelligence early on. And you are an unbelievably precocious child. Am I really? Matilda asked. Well, of course you are. You must be aware of that. Look at your reading. Look at your mathematics. I suppose you're right, Matilda said. Miss Honey marveled at the child's lack of conceit and self-consciousness. I can't help wondering, she said, whether this sudden ability that has come to you of being able to move an object without touching it, whether it might not have something to do with your brain power. You mean there might not be room in my head for all those brains, and so something has to push out? That's not quite what I mean, Miss Honey said, smiling. But whatever happens, and I say it again, we must tread carefully from now on. I have not forgotten that strange, distant glimmer on your face after you tipped over the glass. I keep getting distracted. I don't know if you guys can hear. Can you hear that snoring in the background? That's my dog. And I had to just get that out of the way because he did it a couple days ago. He's doing it again today. He's tuckered out. Anyway, so if you hear that weird sound, that's what it is. I just wanted to point it out. All right. Do you think you could, or wait a minute, let's start over. Okay, I'm just going to read this paragraph over. That's not quite what I mean, Miss Honey said, but whether it happens, and I say it again, we must tread carefully from now on. I have not forgotten the strange, distant glimmer on your face as you tipped over the glass. Do you think it could actually hurt me? Is that what you're thinking, Miss Honey? It made you feel peculiar, didn't it? Oh, it made me feel lovely, Matilda said. For a moment or two, I was flying past the stars on silver wings, I told you that. And I shall try to tell you something else, Miss Honey. It was easier the second time. Much, much easier. I think it's like anything else. The more you practice, the easier it gets. Miss Honey was walking slowly so that the small child could keep up with her without trotting too fast, and it was very peaceful out there on the narrow road that the village was behind them. Now, it was one of those golden autumn afternoons. There were blackberries and splashes of old man's beard in the hedges, and hawthorn berries ripening in scarlet for the birds when the cold winter came along. There were tall trees here and there on either side, oak, sycamore, ash, and occasionally a sweet chestnut. Miss Honey, wishing to change the subject for a moment, gave the names of all those to Matilda and taught her how to recognize them by the shape of their leaves and the pattern of the bark on their trunks. Matilda took all this in and stored the knowledge away carefully in her mind. Then came finally to a gap at the hedge of the left-hand side of the road, where there was a 5-barred gate. This way, Miss Honey said, and she opened the gate and led Matilda through and closed it again. They were now walking along a narrow lane that was no more than a rutted cart rack. There were high hedge of hazel on either side, and you could see clusters of ripe brown nuts on their green jackets. The squirrels would be collecting them very soon, Miss Honey said, all storing them away carefully for the bleak months ahead. You mean you live down here? Matilda asked. I do, Miss Honey replied. But she said no more. Matilda had never once stopped to think about where Miss Honey might be living. She had always regarded her as purely a teacher, a person who turned up out of nowhere and taught school and then went away again. Do any of his children, she wondered, ever stop to ask themselves where our teachers go when school is over for the day? Do we ever wonder if they live alone or if there's a mother or at home or a sister or a husband? Do you live all by yourself, Miss Honey? She asked. Yes, Miss Honey said, very much so. They were walking over the deep sun-baked mud tracks of the lane, and you had to watch where you put your feet if you didn't want to twist your ankle. There were a few small birds around the hazel branches, but that was all. It's just a farm laborer's cottage, Miss Honey said. You mustn't expect too much of it. We're nearly there. They came to a small green gate half buried in the hedge, right along the almost hidden overhanging hazel branches. Miss Honey paused with one hand on the gate and said, There it is. That's where I live. Matilda saw a narrow dirt path leading to a tiny red brick cottage. The cottage was so small it looked more like a doll's house than a human dwelling. The bricks it was built on were old and crumbly and very pale red. It had a gray slate roof and one small chimney, and there were 2 little windows in the front. Each window was no larger than a sheet of tabloid paper. There was clearly no upstairs to the place. On either side of the path there was a wilderness of nettles and blackberry thorns and long brown grass. An enormous oak tree stood overshadowing the cottage. Its massive spreading branches seemed to be unfolding and embracing the tiny cottage, and perhaps hiding it well from the rest of the world. Miss Honey, with one hand on the gate, which she had not yet opened, turned to Matilda and said, A poet called Dylan Thomas once wrote some lines that I think of every time I walk up this path. Matilda waited, and Miss Honey, in a rather wonderful, slow voice, began reciting the poem. Never and never, my girl riding far and near, in the land of the hearthstone tales and spelled asleep, fear or believe that the wolf in the sheep-white hood, loping and bleeding, roughly and blithing, shall leap, my dear, out of the lair of the flocked leaves in the dew-dipped year, to eat your heart in the house in the rosy wood. There was a moment of silence, and Matilda, who had never before heard great romantic poetry spoken aloud, was profoundly moved. It's like music, she whispered. It is music, Miss Honey said. And then, as though embarrassed at having revealed such a secret part of her life, she quickly pushed open the gate and walked in the path. Matilda hung back. She was a bit frightened of the place now. It seemed so unreal and remote and fantastic and totally away from this earth. It was like an illustration in Grimm or Hans Andersen. It was the house where the poor woodcutter lived with Hansel and Gretel, or where Red Riding Hood's grandmother lived. It was also the house of the 7 dwarves, or the 3 bears, and all the rest of them. It was straight from a fairy tale. Come along, my dear, Miss Honey called back, and Matilda followed her up the path. The front door was covered with flaky green paint, and there was no keyhole. Miss Honey simply lifted a latch and pushed open the door and went in. Although she was not a tall woman, she had to stoop low to get through the doorway. Matilda went after her and found herself in what seemed to be a dark, narrow tunnel. You can come through to the kitchen and help me make tea, Miss Honey said, and she led the way along the tunnel into the kitchen. That is, if you call it a kitchen. It was not much bigger than a good-sized clothes cupboard. There was one small window in the back with a sink under the window, but there were no taps over the sink. Against another wall, there was a shelf, presumably for preparing food, and there was a single cupboard above that shelf. On the shelf itself, there stood a Primus stove, a saucepan, and a half-full bottle of milk. A Primus is a little camping stove that you fill with paraffin, and you light it at the top, and then you pump to get the pressure for the flame. You get me some water while I light the Primus, Miss Honey said. The well is out and back. Take the bucket, here it is. You'll find a rope for the well. Just hook the bucket to the end of the rope and lower it down. Don't fall in yourself. Matilda was more bemused than ever now to look at the bucket and carried it out to the garden. The well had a little wooden roof over the top of it. A simple winding device was there for the rope dangling down to the dark, bottomless hole. Matilda pulled the rope and hooked the handle to the bucket to the end of it. Then she lowered it until she heard a splash, and the rope went slack. She pulled it up again, and lo and behold, there was water in the bucket. So here's your little well. That's how they used to get water once upon a time. And Miss Honey was out in the country so far that that's where she still had to get her water. Is this enough, she asked, carrying it in. Just about, Miss Honey said. I don't suppose you've ever done that before. Never, Matilda said. It's fun. How do you get enough water for your bath? Well, I don't take a bath, Miss Honey. I wash standing up. I get a bucket full of water and I heat it on this little stove and I wash myself all over. You honestly do that, Miss Honey? Well, of course I do, Miss Honey said. Every poor person in England used to wash that way until not so very long ago. And they didn't have a Primus. They had to heat their water over fire in the hearth. Are you poor, Miss Honey? Excuse me. Yes, Miss Honey said. Very. It's a good little stove, isn't it? Sorry. The Primus was roaring away with a powerful blue flame, and already the water in the saucepan was beginning to bubble. Oh, excuse me. Miss Honey got a teapot from the cupboard and put some tea leaves into it. She also found a half-small loaf of brown bread. She cut 2 thin slices, and then from a plastic container she took some margarine and spread it on the bread. Margarine, Matilda thought. She must really be poor. Matilda found a tray, and on it she put 2 mugs, the teapot, half a bottle of milk, and a plate with 2 slices of bread. I'm afraid I don't have any sugar, she said. I never use it. That's all right, Matilda said. In her wisdom, she seemed to be aware of the delicacy of the situation. She was taking great care not to say anything to embarrass Miss Honey. Let's have it in the sitting room, Miss Honey said, picking up the tray and leading it out the way, the kitchen, down the dark tunnel, into the room in the front. Matilda followed her, but inside the doorway of the so-called sitting room, she stopped and stared around her in absolute amazement. The room was as small and square and bare as a prison cell. The pale daylight that entered from the room from a single tiny window in the front wall, but there were no curtains. The only objects in the entire room were 2 upturned wooden boxes that served as chairs and a 3rd box for a table, and that was all. There were no pictures on the walls, no carpet on the floor, only rough, unpolished wooden planks, and there were gaps between the planks where dust and bits of grime had gathered. The ceiling was so low that with a jump Matilda could nearly touch it with her fingertips, and the walls were white, but the whiteness didn't look like paint. Matilda rubbed her palm against the white powder, and white powder came off into her skin. It was whitewash, the cheap stuff that is used in cowsheds and stables and hen houses. Matilda was appalled that this was where her neat, trimly dressed schoolteacher lived. Was this all she had to come back to after a day's work? It was unbelievable. And what reason for it? There's something very strange going on around here, surely. And that's where we have to leave off today. So close to the end. Hopefully we'll get a couple in tomorrow. Thanks again for tuning in. Hope you are having a great day. Get out and enjoy some sunshine. A little vitamin D through the sun always makes you feel a little better and a little little chipper. There we go. Anyway, love you guys. Take care. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.